So, as I told you yesterday, we're kind of walking through both the curriculum lecture and the one from In Search of Jesus, the one that I wrote, and I'll go back and forth with that. We started this yesterday. I'm not going to read the whole passage again because we'll read the parts that are germane to us today as we go, and. They'll be up on it'll all be up on the board there, PowerPoint. So we'll review a little bit, and this is the introduction. So in John 7 through 9, we find Jesus in another Jewish festival. Much of this narrative occurs in and around the Feast of Tabernacles, a Jewish holiday, holy day, celebrating the harvest of grapes and olives. The feast takes place in late September to early October. It depends on the year. Because these crops need protection, farmers would build huts in the field during the harvest. This is how it gets its name then. So in recognition of this fact, and as a reminder of Israel's wandering when they lived in the desert and they were in tents, right, in the desert. The people coming to Jerusalem for the feast would build makeshift huts to live in for the week. These booths, or tabernacles, gave the feast its name. Two of the primary features of the feast were the water drawing ritual and the lamp lighting ritual. Jesus is going to use this occasion and these rituals specifically to reveal to the crowds who he is, the source of living water and the light of the world. And everything Jesus says in this story is specifically connected to not only to the Feast of Tabernacles, but also to who he is. And as we've been talking about Jesus throughout the year, that he is the fulfillment of all of this. And he is the fulfillment of the Feast of Tabernacles as well. I'm not going to read the whole passage because we're going to go through it bit by bit as we go through. And it starts out, the curriculum starts out with why Jesus was absent from the spotlight for a while. Because it was hot, that doesn't really make sense. It's almost always hot in Israel, and that never bothered him before. The Pharisees are growing more antagonistic, and that is true. And actually, the chapter tells us that. Chapter 7 tells us that. And then the people are excited about making him king. Some were, but that fervor might have died down since the feeding of the 5,000, because this is sometime after that. So I don't think we can know any of those for sure, so that's not something I'd ever ask a question about. Herod's growing more suspicious. It's all true. I just don't know that it's connected to the break that he took for a little while. He needed rest. He needed time to train his disciples. But none of that, I think, is the most important thing. So we're going to begin with John 7, 1 through 5. Another place. Okay. So after this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. That's the only reason that we're given that Jesus stayed in Galilee. And so now the Jews' Feast of the Booths, so that was before the Feast of the Booths, that he stayed in Galilee. Now it's saying the Jews' Feast of the Booths was at hand, meaning it was near. So his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you are doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." For not even his brothers believed in him. So they're trying to get him to go to the feast with them. Why? We don't know for sure. I think it's possible that they wanted to show up with him. I think I mentioned Taylor Swift yesterday, and when they pan to the box she's in, she's got all her friends there in that box. And so maybe something like that, maybe so that they can become famous, but it doesn't tell us that, so we don't know for sure But he's not going to go with his brothers. He's going to go alone. He's going to go almost incognito. And so they're trying to get him to go make a big show, and maybe on their part, maybe, we don't know for sure, they would get into the limelight too, and they wanted that. So his brothers urged Jesus to attend the feast. They failed to understand about his impending death. He's not talking about, I don't believe he's talking about his impending death at this point, for the reasons I told you yesterday. The curriculum's take is that it's not his time to die yet. But that's not what he's saying. And remember, yesterday I gave you these two words. Hora, which is always in John translated hour. They're both words about time. They're just a little bit different. And kairos, which means time. So when Jesus is saying it's not his time to die yet, he always said that word is always hora. In this case, when he says it's not his time to come up, his time to go, he uses kairos. And so what I mentioned to you yesterday is that he's saying it's not time for me to go to the feast yet. He's going to go. It's just he wasn't on their timetable. He was on God's timetable. And so he's waiting until the Father says go. And he will go to the Feast of Tabernacles. It's not, and why God said wait, we don't know. But that's my take on how that works. So he was going to go to the Feast of the Tabernacles when God said, now it's time to go. He was going to go on God's timetable, not man's timetable. And I told you that very loosely he's saying, you go ahead, I'll catch up with you. It's not his time to die, and that is true, but that's not what this is talking about, as I just said. And it's not his purpose to disrupt the city. Probably true too, but it doesn't tell us that. So now let's turn to verses 6 through 9. And Jesus said to them, my time has not yet come, but your time is always here. So he's talking to his brothers still. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it that its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I'm not going up to this feast, for my time has not fully come. After saying this, he remained in Galilee for a while, and he ended up in Jerusalem eventually. So he says, my kairos, my time to go to the feast hasn't come. So Jesus goes to the Feast of Tabernacles. It says in secret. I don't know if it's in secret, but he goes alone, certainly. And so it says this, but after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he also went up, not publicly, but in private. The Jews were looking for him at the feast and saying, where is he? And there was much muttering about him among the people. While some said, he is a good man, others said, no, he is leading people astray. Yet, for the fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly of them. They didn't want to be connected to Jesus. So, the Feast of Tabernacles was one of the major events of the year, one of the major religious festivals in Judaism. And it lasted, the curriculum says 7 days, but it also says 8 days. I've always thought it was 8 days. And as we talked about, the Jews would live in these huts that they would build. And it was doing two things. First of all, it was asking God or kind of thanksgiving to God for the harvest, almost like our Thanksgiving. And then it was also looking back on God's provision, God's care for the Israelites as they wandered through the desert. And the people have different opinions about who Jesus is. Is he a good man? Is he a charlatan? But most or some of the people are saying that he's a good man, but they're not going to talk about it because they don't want to get in trouble with the Jewish leader. So yeah, it says 7 days here. It says 8 days here. I think 8 days is right. And it's in the fall, and they live in booths, and it's also called Sukkot. That's the word in the Hebrew is Sukkot. And then it's a memorial to God for giving them the land, for giving them the food that came from the land. And it's a feast of gratitude. That's why I say it's something like our Thanksgiving. And then now we're going to go through verses 14 through 31 bit by bit. And part of this is from the curriculum, but part of this is from my In Search of Jesus lesson. So they're in chapter 14, the people are marveled by Jesus's brilliance, but the Jews are going to kind of interrogate him about this. So about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began teaching. So he goes to the temple and he begins to teach. The Jews, therefore, so when you see the Jews, right, that's the leadership. So the Jews, therefore, marveled, saying, "How is it that this man has learning when he has never studied?" So Jesus answered them, "My teacher is not mine, but it is his who sent me." So here was the rabbinical tradition, and you probably remember this from the video we watched earlier in the year, that you would find a scholar, a known scholar, and use his teaching and be taught by him for your degree, if it will. They didn't really have degrees, but to become a rabbi, you had to study under another rabbi, and you used his teaching and under his authority to become that, and it was that rabbi's teaching that was the precedent for the scholar, not the scholar, the rabbi that was in training. And they asked Jesus these questions about him. They wanted what they're doing is wanting to know where he gets his authority. Who did you study under? What scholar was your rabbi? Where did you get this knowledge? So how does he have this learning when he has never studied? And so he says, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. Now, who is that? Who sent him? God. What do you think the Jews thought that meant? You think they thought it was God? No, then who would it be? Another scholar, a rabbi. Yeah, so who's teaching, right? That's basically what they're talking about. So, and the conversation, and he had this conversation a number of times, but the conversation went something like this, like, who is, how do you know all this stuff? Who is your teacher? And he's like, God. God is my teacher. And the people, the leadership didn't accept that. It reminds me, many, many years ago, I was in college, and my younger sister was in high school. And my parents were at a church. My dad was on the elder board, and he, at one of their meetings, some of the elders brought up that the high school Sunday school teacher wasn't using the Presbyterian curriculum. And they were very upset that he wasn't using the Presbyterian curriculum. And so my father asked my sister, does Gary use the Presbyterian curriculum? And she said, well, he uses the Bible. Is that Presbyterian? Yeah, it is. It's a much higher power than whatever the curriculum was. And that's what Jesus is saying, is that he is God, and his learning is superior to any rabbi, and he is superior to any rabbi because of that. They didn't understand who he was. And part of that was they didn't understand, and some of it was they refused to see. So Christ reveals the source of his learning and his divine humility. In verses 17 and 18 it says this: if anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own authority. The one who speaks on his own authority seeks his own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and in him there is no falsehood. So he's saying, my authority comes from God. I'm listening to God. I'm telling you what God tells me. God is my authority. And they can't, I don't think they believe it, but they also can't argue against it. And so here's basically what's happening there. Where did you go to school? They ask him. Evan, who was your teacher? God. Is that high enough for you? And so they are, they don't understand, they can't understand who Jesus is. And then in verses 17 and 18, the question is, what is God's will? And the answer is keeping the law. But they aren't keeping the law, and Jesus calls them on that. And he says, like, for example, you want to kill me. That's unlawful. I want to make sure I didn't miss it. Yep, we're good. So they marvel at his brilliance. Christ reveals the source of his learning and his divine humility, that he gets it from God and he himself is God. And Christ accuses the people of seeking to kill him. And they are. They might deny it, but they are. And eventually they will. They will do that. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why do you seek to kill me? That's what he said. So here are the results of his teaching. In verse, I need to go back. Because this is important. When Jesus talks about he did one healing on the Sabbath, right? And they got all upset. And he talks about how they also break the law. This isn't the exact wording, but it's I need to do this. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why do you seek to kill me? The crowd answered, you have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you? Jesus answered them, I did one work, and you all marvel at it. It was the healing before in the last chapter. So I did one work, and you all marvel at it. Moses gave you circumcision, not that it was from Moses, but from the fathers, and you, Abraham, and you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision so that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a whole man's body? Well, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. Okay, here's what's going on in this interchange with Jesus and the Jewish leadership. And you have to kind of understand, the Jewish rite of circumcision a little bit to do that. So does everybody know what circumcision is? Okay, so and circumcision is a requirement of all Jewish male, and they are circumcised as a baby on the seventh day after they're born. So, and it is required, and it's a religious rite. It's almost like if you have confirmation somewhere or like that. It's almost it is a rite. Okay, so what you have to understand is if the seventh day, and the guy that performed the circumcision, he was called a berit. So if the seventh day after a baby was born was the Sabbath, they still did the circumcision. That berit did his job. He was working. He did what his job was. Because it was that God ordained it to be on the seventh day. So here's what Jesus is saying, and this is a little bit hard to understand, but he's connecting the healing in John 5 of the man at the pool of Bethesda, right? That he healed on the Sabbath. And here's the gist of that. He's saying that circumcision was given to Abraham, but put into law under Moses. And it was seen as a perfecting rite, a renewal, a sort of healing, of making something that was wrong right. And so if the seventh day after a birth was a Sabbath, they still performed that circumcision, even though the person performing it was working. So what Jesus is saying is, if it's okay to heal someone partially on the Sabbath, why is it not okay to heal someone fully on the Sabbath? They're being inconsistent with the law. So Jesus is not breaking the Sabbath. He is fulfilling both the Sabbath and circumcision in this story. This kind of confuses them a little bit. And so I'm going to stop there, and then we'll pick up here tomorrow. Finish this up, and you'll take your quiz, and everything will be hunky-dory.